The White House. It's supposed to stand as a beacon of American strength, a place where decisions that shape the world are made. But what truly happens when leaders from different corners of the globe step into that hallowed Oval Office? Yesterday, May 21st, 2025, was a stark reminder. Former President Donald Trump, a man who never shies away from a confrontation, met with South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa. This wasn't your typical diplomatic pleasantry, the kind filled with empty smiles and carefully worded statements. Oh no, this encounter was charged, focusing on issues that many in the corridors of power, and certainly in the mainstream media, would prefer to keep buried deep beneath the surface. It was about truth, however uncomfortable. The atmosphere in that room, sources say, was thick with an almost palpable tension. You could have sliced it with a ceremonial letter opener. We've witnessed these kinds of high-stakes meetings before, haven't we? Think back to President Zelensky of Ukraine, appearing, shall we say, somewhat supplicant. This meeting had a similar intensity, but it carried a different, perhaps more ominous undercurrent. Trump, characteristically direct and unwilling to dance around the issues, was clearly prepared to press his points. Ramaphosa, on the other hand, found himself in the unenviable position of being on the defensive, even before the formal discussions began. The reason is simple. Some truths are incredibly hard to face, especially when they challenge a carefully constructed national image. The very heart of this dramatic confrontation revolved around a subject that is systematically downplayed, often ignored, and sometimes actively suppressed by the globalist elites and their media allies: the perilous situation of white farmers in South Africa. Donald Trump, in his unique style, dared to drag this issue into the spotlight of the Oval Office. He dared to ask the blunt questions that others are too timid or too politically correct to utter. Are these farmers being specifically targeted for violence? Is their land, cultivated over generations, being systematically stolen from them? Are heinous, unspeakable crimes against this minority being met with a shrug and a blind eye? These were not gentle diplomatic inquiries. These were direct, forceful accusations demanding answers. And why, you might ask, should this matter to you, an American living thousands of miles away? It matters because the events unfolding in South Africa are not isolated. They serve as a crucial test case, a potential harbinger of things to come if certain ideologies are allowed to fester and spread unchecked. This intense meeting, this veritable showdown in the Oval Office, was about far more than just two political leaders and their respective countries. It was a debate about the fundamental principles of property rights, the sanctity of human life, and whether safety and security are guaranteed for all, or only for a select politically favored few. The implications are profound and disturbing, and they resonate far beyond the borders of Pretoria or Washington. So, what precisely were the claims that Donald Trump leveled against the South African government, with its leader sitting right across from him? He didn't pull any punches. He laid out his concerns with stark clarity, accusing President Ramaphosa's administration of, at best, tolerating and at worst, actively enabling the persecution of white farmers, particularly the Afrikaner community. He even used the highly charged term, white genocide. These are powerful, unsettling words, designed to shock the complacent and awaken the indifferent. Trump insisted that these farmers are not just facing hardship, they are being brutally killed, often in the most horrific ways imaginable. Is anyone in a position of power truly listening? But the accusations didn't stop at the tragic loss of life, Trump emphasized. He spoke forcefully about the issue of land, their land, farms that have been in families for generations, productive lands that have contributed significantly to feeding the nation and the wider region. Trump asserted, based on numerous reports and testimonies, that this land is being systematically stolen, confiscated without fair compensation, often without any compensation at all. To underscore his point, he reportedly presented chilling footage. This footage allegedly showed crowds chanting slogans like, "Kill the Boer," "Kill the farmer." Imagine hearing such chants in your own country, aimed at your community. What would you think? What would you demand from your leaders? Now, the predictable chorus from the usual suspects, the legacy media, the academic left, the globalist institutions, will be to dismiss all of this as mere right-wing fear-mongering. They will claim that Trump is simply stirring the pot for political gain. But is that the full story? Or is he giving voice to a legitimate and deeply troubling concern shared by many ordinary, decent people around the world? A concern that a specific, identifiable minority group is being systematically dispossessed, terrorized, and targeted, while the international community largely averts its gaze, too paralyzed by political correctness or indifference to speak out. This isn't just abstract politics. For these communities, it's a matter of literal survival. And then we must consider the deeply concerning issue of refugees. Small but significant groups of white South Africans, entire families in some cases, have been arriving on American shores. They are not coming as tourists or economic migrants. They are seeking asylum. They are formally claiming that they were forced to flee their homeland to save their lives and protect their children. If the situation in South Africa is as stable and equitable as some officials and their allies would have us believe, why are its citizens running away? Why are they pleading for protection in a foreign land? These are not individuals seeking better job prospects. These are people who articulate credible fears of facing existential threats in the country of their birth. Faced with such direct and grave accusations, how did President Cyril Ramaphosa respond? According to most reports, he maintained his composure, a skill often honed by politicians who find themselves in tight spots. That's the standard line, isn't it? He attempted to downplay the significance of those incendiary chants like, "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer." He dismissed them as the ravings of a few extremists, assuring Trump that such sentiments do not, in any way, represent official government policy. Just a fringe element, you see. Nothing to be overly concerned about. But one has to ask, when such hateful rhetoric is heard at political rallies, sometimes involving members of the ruling party, how truly separate and insignificant are these fringe elements? President Ramaphosa then pivoted to the perceived safety of South Africa's legal framework. He stated that the country's laws regarding land are clear and just. He even drew a comparison between South Africa's policy of land expropriation and America's own principle of eminent domain. This was a rather clever rhetorical maneuver, an attempt to normalize what many see as a deeply problematic policy by likening it to a common practice in Western democracies. We too have the right to expropriate land for public use, he essentially argued, just as your government does. But is this comparison truly valid? Is the targeted acquisition of land, potentially based on racial criteria, the same as acquiring a parcel of land for a new highway or public school after due process and fair compensation? That remains the crucial, unanswered question. Interestingly, the New York Times, not typically a publication sympathetic to Donald Trump, pointed out a certain irony in this exchange. Trump himself, during his initial term as president, controversially utilized the power of eminent domain. He pushed to acquire land from farmers and other property owners in South Texas to construct his signature border wall. And yes, some of those landowners resisted and felt aggrieved. But was that policy specifically aimed at dispossessing a particular racial or ethnic group? Or was it, however contentious, part of a broader national security project? The context, as it so often does, provides critical distinctions. And Ramaphosa's carefully chosen comparison conveniently seemed to overlook these vital nuances. Ultimately, President Ramaphosa's objective in that Oval Office meeting was clear: to project an image of South Africa as a stable, modern nation governed by the rule of law. He sought to reassure his American counterpart, and by extension the world, that his country remains the rainbow nation it aspired to be post-apartheid. He had to attempt this. His international standing and his country's economic prospects depended on it. Yet, Trump's pointed accusations, the disturbing images, and the harrowing personal stories emerging from South Africa paint a starkly different and deeply unsettling picture. A picture of pervasive fear, profound uncertainty, and a government that many believe is either losing control or, more alarmingly, is complicit in the unfolding crisis. The critical question remains: who should we believe? Now let us directly address that explosive term, white genocide. The BBC, along with many other establishment media outlets, predictably rushes to inform us that this claim is widely discredited. But we must ask, discredited by whom exactly? Is it discredited by those who consistently downplay inconvenient truths or promote specific political agendas? White genocide is undeniably a potent and alarming phrase, intended to provoke a strong reaction. But when a specific minority group faces demonstrably high levels of targeted violence and the systematic threat of land confiscation, can we dismiss such concerns out of hand? The undeniable fact is that farm murders in South Africa are shockingly frequent and often characterized by extreme brutality. These are not mere statistics. They represent human lives, families destroyed, and communities living in constant fear. Of course, the South African government and its apologists will quickly counter that the overall crime rate in the country is tragically high for everyone. And that is true. But does that fully explain the situation? Are these farm attacks merely random acts of violence in a high-crime environment? Or is there a discernible pattern, an ideological undercurrent fanned by hateful rhetoric and historical grievances that makes these farmers particularly vulnerable targets? The evidence strongly suggests the latter, if one is willing to look beyond official pronouncements and listen to the voices of the victims. And what are we to make of those white South Africans who have been granted refugee status in the United States and other Western nations? If there is no genocide, no specific threat of persecution targeting this group, on what grounds are they being granted asylum? Refugee status is not handed out casually. It signifies that a government has assessed their claims and found them to be credible, that these individuals face a genuine fear of persecution. This reality directly contradicts the assertion that the white genocide claim is entirely baseless. It presents a profound paradox that proponents of open borders and those who deny the crisis seem unwilling to address. So, where does this leave us? We are confronted with a deep, disturbing chasm between official narratives and lived realities. Donald Trump, in his characteristic fashion, brought an uncomfortable truth into the very heart of American power, the Oval Office. President Ramaphosa offered his counter-arguments and denials as was expected. The mainstream media will undoubtedly spin the encounter according to their pre-existing biases. But it is incumbent upon you, the thinking citizen, to look beyond the headlines, to scrutinize the available facts, and to ask the difficult questions. Because what is happening to the white farmers in South Africa today is not just a remote tragedy. It could, if we are not vigilant, serve as a chilling precedent for other communities tomorrow, especially if truth continues to be sacrificed at the altar of political correctness. This matters. It matters profoundly.